Oscar Claude Monet, later just Claude, was born in Paris in 1840. When you think of Impressionist painters, Claude Monet immediately comes to mind, as it was his 1871 painting, Impression Sunrise, which gave the movement its name. Starting as a caricaturist, he moved on to become a landscapist, and he often included people in his landscapes. Although he painted many varied subjects over the years, Monet was most interested in two things: landscapes and the lively play of light on water. So, in 1872, he bought his own small studio boat where he was able to paint landscapes in tandem with their reflection upon the river's surface. He was extremely poor when he first started, but he nevertheless married his first wife, Camille, who bore him a son, Jean. They were very friendly with Ernest and Alice Hochschild, mostly because Ernest was an avid collector of Monet's canvases. Unfortunately, Ernest went bankrupt and deserted Alice and their 4 daughters. Meantime, Camille bore Monet a second son, Michel, but she herself died shortly after from tuberculosis in 1879. Alice, who had acted as a nurse to Camille, continued to nanny Monet's sons and ran the house for him. So there they were, all living together, Alice and her 4 daughters, and Monet with his 2 sons. Eventually, and unbelievably, one of the sons married one of the daughters. In 1883, Monet moved his household to Giverny, where, with no money, he managed, with the support of his agent Paul Durand-Ruel, to buy a house and garden. And it was here that Monet finally achieved both commercial and artistic success, which lasted throughout his long career. Today we know this as Monet's Garden. As you can see, besides his other talents, he was a great horticulturist. He loved flowers of all shapes and sizes, and when he moved into his house, he immediately decided he would tear up the typical bourgeois garden that was there and introduce his own idea of what a garden should be. He had a slight tussle with Alice over a few trees, but for the most part, his initial garden design was eventually executed. He loved arches and climbing vines, and once he had established the outline of his ideas, he then went on to plant masses of flowers, beautifully thought out, so that something was blooming every season of the year. He dug, planted, and weeded everything himself, and in the evening the children watered. Eventually he had to employ a gardener and 5 under-gardeners, but Monet gave orders and inspected the garden several times a day. Inside his house, Monet used his drawing room first as a studio and later as a salon. It was simply furnished with wicker armchairs and chintz-covered sofas. It held a collection of Monet's paintings representative of every period. There was one there that an opera singer rejected because she felt there wasn't enough paint on the canvas. In 1891, Alice's husband died, and she and Claude married. This was Alice's bedroom next to his on the 2nd floor. The dining room ceiling and furniture were painted entirely in 2 shades of yellow. It was here that he entertained his fellow painters and other guests. In the kitchen, Marguerite, the cook, bustled about between her chopping board, the preserving pans, and the indispensable scales. It was from the windows of his house that he could now catch the reflective light and colour of each bloom, or, when the weather was fine, he could set up a series of easels outside and go from one to the other to add the requisite dab of paint to make the picture come alive. These turkeys in the yard remind us of the painting Alice's first husband commissioned for her dining room. The painting was never finished, but Monet did show it in 1876, and it was the first unfinished painting ever allowed in an exhibition. When Monet's paintings started to sell well, he bought a plot of land and was able to satisfy his abiding passion for water by becoming the owner of a river. Across the road at the bottom of the garden was a meadow, through which the river Rue flowed. There lay a tiny pond where wild water lilies and kingcups flourished. In 1890, Monet bought it and remodeled the little pond, enlarged it repeatedly, curved the edges as he pleased, and with the help of twisting paths and clumps of trees, he succeeded in producing the effect of a considerable space. Monet planted the edges with every sort of aquatic plant that would grow in the Giverny climate. A system of sluices renewed its water from the river, and undisturbed by any current, the frail water lilies, delicately coloured, floated on the still, sun-warmed water. However, soon the pond became too small for Monet, so he planned to divert the course of the Rue and acquire another plot of land to enlarge his garden. There were endless arguments with the women who washed their linen in the Rue River, and the peasants whose cattle grazed in the riverside meadows were afraid the strange, unfamiliar plants invading the water might poison their animals. The parish council deliberated, and with many reservations, finally gave permission for this branch of the river to be diverted. The bridge, a single arc without piers, inspired by a Japanese print, spanned 2 banks. From there, weeping willows leaned into the pond, while on the water floated Monet's lilies. When he created his lily pond, Monet had not suspected it would be an inexhaustible source of inspiration for over 20 years, and that up to his last day he would paint its every aspect, at every hour, its shimmer and its reflections of the submerged vegetation seen through the transparent water. He was to work at hundreds of paintings and studies there. It was impossible to say where the gardener's work stopped and the paintings began, for the two were manifestly interconnected. In 1908, the greatest possible disaster for a painter threatened. He was troubled with failing eyesight, but continued working. Alice, his beloved wife, passed away 3 years later, on May 19, 1911, which left him completely at a loss. In 1912, he finally visited an eye specialist in Paris, who diagnosed a double cataract and recommended an operation. Monet refused, fearing that an operation would radically affect his vision. In 1914, Monet's son Jean died prematurely. Blanche, his daughter-in-law, became Monet's devoted companion and housekeeper. It was at this time that his disability led to a choice of tonalities he never previously attempted, with dominant fawns, bright or dark, vivid and murky greens, mustard yellows, crimson and purple reds, and darkened blues. In 1923, he finally had the operation on his right eye. He was an unspeakably difficult invalid, and as a result he became increasingly taciturn and depressed. Frequent signs of fatigue were setting in by the beginning of 1926. The facts had to be faced. The doctors diagnosed pulmonary sclerosis, to which long years of smoking must have contributed. Only one lung was functioning, and that not well. Monet died midday on December the 5th, 1926. As an atheist, Monet was given the quiet funeral he'd always wanted. His body was taken from the house and carried to his grave in the old village hearse, accompanied by his family, a crowd of silent villagers, and 4 of his fellow artists. There was no religious ceremony and no funeral oration. There were only his friends, his family, and of course, flowers.